Hey, I'm Sarah, and this is the Goddess in Training podcast. This isn't about being perfect or polished or having it all figured out. This is about what happens when you actually start listening to your body, your intuition, your patterns, your truth. I'm asking big questions and having real conversations, sometimes messy and sometimes magical, with people who've lived through it, grown through it, and still don't have all the answers. If you've ever doubted yourself, betrayed your gut, or wondered if you're the only one, you're not. Let's talk about it. Hi, welcome back to another episode of Goddess in Training. I'm your host, Sarah. Today's conversation is one I've genuinely been looking forward to because we're talking about something that's been showing up again and again on this podcast lately, paradox. That place where two truths can exist at once, where life refuses to be tidy, where intuition often speaks the clearest. My guest is Prashanthi Amarnath, author of the book Embracing Paradox, which brings the Tao Te Ching into modern life through 81 micro lessons, small, actionable invitations that aren't meant to overwhelm you with information, but create enough stillness that your own knowing can rise. And I'll tell you, within minutes of this conversation starting, Prashanthi said something that stopped me in my tracks. She talked about the Tao not as something we understand, but as something we experience. And she named this movement from being the observer of your life to the moment when the observer dissolves, when there's no separation, just life moving through life. We go into Wu Wei, effortless action that isn't laziness, but clarity without force. We talk about goals, achievement, and what it means to release attachment without becoming passive. We talk about parenting in a world built on outcomes. We talk about fear, especially the fear of visibility and the quiet strength that comes from letting yourself be misunderstood without self-betrayal. And one of my favorite parts of this episode is how Prashanthi talks about Mother Tao, the divine intelligence that holds the rhythms, the cycles, the timing we can't always see, and how trusting that doesn't make your life smaller. It makes it more spacious, more resilient, more honest. If you're in a season where you're doing the right thing, listening to your intuition, but you don't know what's next, this conversation is for you. All right, take a breath, soften your shoulders, and let's drop in. Hi, welcome back to another episode of Goddess in Training. I'm your host, Sarah, and today I am here with Prashanthi Amarnath, who has written a book called Embracing Paradox. And I am so excited to have this conversation because I was a religion major in college and studied the Tao Te Ching a little bit, but that seems like lifetimes ago. And so as I've been thinking about this conversation, it's been so fun to remember what I learned back then and how it really is so integrally connected to intuition and all of the themes that we're talking about here on the Goddess in Training podcast. So Prashanthi, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sarah. It is an honor to be here and to have a space where conversations like this can exist. My name is Prashanthi, and my work with Embracing Paradox is rooted in the Tao Te Ching, not as a philosophy to explain, but as a way of experiencing life. I listened to your conversation, Sarah, with Tabby about being an observer in your own life. And it kind of struck me so deeply because that is the heartbeat of the Tao. The Tao teaches us to step back, to witness both sides, like without being consumed by either, to let the world just move without insisting it move through us. But it also points to an even deeper state, the place where the observer dissolves because there's no one left to observe and nothing left to separate. Just the Tao experiencing itself through form, profoundly aligned with what you and Tabby had explored. And that is the space I hope to speak from today, not from identity or expertise, but from the simplicity of the Tao itself, the part of life that doesn't need definition, so doesn't seek recognition and doesn't force anything into being. I am grateful to be here and I'm curious to see where Tao takes this conversation.
I love what you said so much because so many of my conversations have been moving in that direction. And that's kind of the mission of Goddess in Training in and of itself. It's that lived, embodied experience that matters so much. And we focus sometimes on
transcendence or where we're going, what we're going to be.
Hmm.
And it's really the here and the now that is it. So I read that you grew up with exposure to a whole bunch of different traditions, spiritual traditions. How did that shape you? And how did that get you to land on the Tao Te Ching in and of itself to focus on?
So when you grow up with multiple belief systems, right, something subtle but profound just happens. You start to see that certainty is often a matter of perspective, but curiosity is universal. Instead of clinging to one explanation of reality, you watch sincere people hold completely different truths with complete conviction, and that does something to the mind. It dissolves the illusion that there is only one right way to understand the world. Certainty becomes very contextual and curiosity becomes expansive. And that distinction changes everything. Certainty tends to clamp down. It wants to have clear edges, fixed answers, and predictable conclusions. It creates a psychological posture of tightening as the truth must be defended to stay alive. But curiosity just does the opposite, right? It opens and it softens and it invites. And curiosity says that there is more here than I can see right now. And that is where the paradox lives, right? In that space between the two truths that can coexist without canceling each other. And growing up around many paths, you learn very quickly that wisdom doesn't belong to any single tradition. You see devotion expressed in different languages, different rituals, different worldviews, but yet the sincerity underneath all of them feels the same. Imagine growing up in India at the time with so many different religions coexisting at the same time. And I was very fortunate to have a guru in this life who embraced all religions. It doesn't matter. He says, love all, serve all. And that teaches something very essential, right? Curiosity keeps unfolding, and curiosity doesn't need to win. It doesn't need to prove. It simply listens. And in that listening, it becomes spacious enough to hold paradox with ease. And that's the orientation that Tao awakened in me. Not the search for the right belief, right? But the ability to stand in space between the beliefs, where humility, openness, and the real understanding live. How did early exposure shape my relationship with certainty? Definitely taught me that certainty gives you a position, but curiosity kind of gives you the pathway. And certainty locks your brain, locks your mind, but curiosity expands the heart. And paradox, that ability to hold both the truths at the same time, grows naturally from that expansion. And that is where I completely surrender to Tao, the Divine Mother, Tao.
I've been thinking a lot about goals and the role that they play in our lives. And you are clearly a really driven person. You are a family and you have a career and you've written this book. In the context of paradox and the Tao Te Ching, what what role do goals play in your life?
So, goals to me are something that you define and you try to get there with a certain outcome in your mind, right? You have a goal to get to somewhere. So, you have a destination in your mind. But what Taoism says is release that attachment to that destination and let go of that. And that part really resonated with how I viewed Tao as, like you said, I was a very goal oriented person. I wanted to get there. I wanted to reach. I was a topper in my school. I graduated with great rank at the university, and I got the job and I climbed up the ladder. And at the end, I felt like there was something that was missing. There was a gap that I couldn't fill. And all of that is because my attachment to the outcome. And one of the biggest misunderstanding about letting go of outcomes is a fear that it'll make us passive, as if like releasing our grip means releasing our effort. But I want to quote verse 40 of Tao Te Ching that gives us a very different picture. It begins with like two lines that completely reshape how we understand progress. It says return is the moment of the Tao, yielding is the way of the Tao. The Tao doesn't move in straight lines. It moves in circles. Expansion, contraction, forward motion, the return, effort, and rest, just like tides, just like seasons, just like how our own inner lives. So loosening that attachment isn't abandoning effort, right? It's honoring the natural rhythm of things. Attachment comes from believing progress must always be linear, that more effort should always produce more results. But the Tao teaches that sometimes the most meaningful forward moment happens through returning, pausing, and yielding. And yielding here doesn't mean weakness, it means responsiveness, like knowing when to act and knowing when forcing would actually take you further from alignment. And it's that wisdom, and that wisdom arises from holding that paradox of both the truths. And the verse 40 goes on to say, all things are born of being, being is born of non being, meaning that moments that look like stillness, uncertainty, emptiness, those aren't failures. They're fertile ground, insight, creativity, timing, and clarity, all of that raised when that space we usually rush to avoid. But when I lose an attachment to an outcome, I'm not stepping away from responsibility. I'm stepping out of indifference. I show up fully. I care deeply. I no longer insist that life conform to my expectation or my timeline. When things don't move the way I hoped, I remember return is part of the moment, and what looks like setback is often a recalibration. That feels like stillness is often like preparation. But what appears empty is often the beginning of something we can't see it. The understanding builds a very quiet strength in us. And the more I trust that cyclical nature of things, the less desperate I become for results. And I can stay steady during that contraction because I know expansion always follows. And and here's a paradox, right? Losing attachment doesn't make us passive. It just makes us resilient. It lets us work hard without gripping, caring deeply without controlling, and act with intention without demanding. And that is very important, especially in today's world when I was constantly moving towards getting to my goal. I was gripping very tightly to the outcome because I want to win. I wanted to be the topper. I wanted to be the best in whatever I did. But once I started losing that grip on the outcome, I would show up without the pressure, without the noise around me. And that was the lesson that I got from Tao Te Ching and learning Tao, was just holding in that space and show up in the best version possible, but without having to control the outcome.
That has been a lesson that I have been learning over and over and over again. I love what you said about things being cyclical because when you really think back on your life in any experience, it never is in any linear fashion. It's always kind of going around and around the mountain. Somebody once said to me, in terms of healing, you can just jump to the top of the mountain. And I don't think you can. I think the whole purpose is to circle and to learn and to grow in this incremental way. I've been thinking a lot about, am I saying this correctly? Wu Wei, Wu Wei, Wu
Absolutely,
Wei,
yes.
the Tao concept of effortless action. And you were just speaking to this in some respect, but the way that I'm understanding it, it's just so closely tied to intuition because we talk about intuition in a way where
Hmm.
you get into a flow and you're listening to that inner voice that is very, very quiet. It's not the logical, it's not the goals, it's not the laundry lists. It's when you have a feeling that something is right or wrong or that you're supposed to move in this direction, with trust, you just listen to it. So talk more about your understanding of Wu Wei and how that may or may not connect to your understanding of intuition.
Absolutely. When people hear Wu Wei, it means effortless action. They often imagine doing nothing. But in Tao, Wu Wei is not passivity. It's clarity without force. And I want to quote verse 20 of Tao Te Ching that says, stop wasting energy on what doesn't matter. Why fear what the crowd fears? The Tao even says, let people misunderstand you, because Wu Wei is the courage to be misread without self betrayal. It's the discipline of not reacting to every opinion, not performing alignment, not forcing clarity, but kind of reshaping yourself to match that moment. And when you do that, you're directly guided by the Mother Tao. And that's why they say you're sustained by the divine Mother Tao, meaning effortlessness isn't laziness, it's the trust. Wu Wei is acting from that trust. When you act from that point of trust, that is where the intuition lives. That is exactly where you do what you're meant to do. And how do you do that? By being that authentic version of yourself. Like, why chase approval? The Tao was asking, what are you carrying that isn't actually yours? Like we talked about in parenting, leadership, tech. We are constantly judged, measured, and evaluated. But Wu Wei begins the moment you stop outsourcing your inner authority. And sometimes Wu Wei means stepping in, sometimes stepping back. And how do you know that? How do you know when to step in and when to step back? When you're aligned with the Tao, the Mother Tao would guide you. And you need to have that trust, that surrender. And sometimes doing nothing externally while staying like deeply present internally, working without gripping, parenting without controlling, leading without dominating. It's not that you stop caring. It's just that you stop forcing. The more I trust that the Tao is holding me, the less I need to prove that I'm holding everything together. That's Wu Wei. An effort that isn't heavy, action that isn't reactive, moment that raises from alignment, just alignment, not any kind of strain. And that surrender, that quiet trust is what makes effort feel effortless. And imagine our lives, we would be living the ideal lives if we were to like do any work without the effort. Because the first thing when I want to do a work, I'm a project manager, so my mind goes in a direction like, okay, someone's giving me this work, or my daughter is asking me to go to her to a party. Steps A to Z, what I need to do, how much effort does each one of them take? I'm so calculative in my head, and I'm like so caught up in that web of what we call illusion, the Maya. I'm not acting from that point of the point of now, the point of trust. And that is where Wu Wei would take us. It'll exactly pick us up from where we are and drop us in that place where we could be guided by the Tao. And that is what they call the intuition. To get there, there are ways. It's one of the ways that Tao Te Ching says is trust and surrender. The Mother Tao moves everything around the universes, multiple universes. It's operating everything with utmost perfection. Why would we not trust her? She is so powerful.
Love that you talk about Mother Tao. I feel like when I was studying in college, and the Tao was never given any kind of gender identity. Why do you refer to Mother Tao?
Absolutely. I questioned the same when I looked at the Tao Te Ching. Tao, Lao Tzu is this mysterious person that wrote Tao Te Ching. We have no idea who this person is. Lao Tzu literally translates to great grandfather. We don't know. This is a very mysterious person. And he looked at Tao in a lot of different ways. And one thing that Lao Tzu does not like is labeling. And so he talks about that multiple times in Tao Te Ching about how our human brain tends to label, how we tend to call this feminine, how we tend to call this masculine. So he sometimes on Tao Te Ching he calls Tao as father, and sometimes he calls Tao as a mother, and there's a mixture. He doesn't believe in labels. When he's talking about a verse that talks about the feminine side of Tao, he calls her mother. And when he refers to Tao as the father, the action, that side of Tao, he calls as a father. You see that the feminine and masculine, both of them just intermingling in Tao, and he presents it to us as a yin and yang, both feminine and masculine together, and how they balance each other out in the most beautiful way when he basically talks about the feminine and masculine inside our own body. Because we are made of both feminine and masculine. I could be feminine outwardly, but I have both the feminine and the masculinity in me. And when they both are in perfect harmony, and that's the Shiva and Shakti we call, it's when they come together, they meet in that place, and that's the place of being in Tao, being in alignment with Tao, when the femininity and masculinity gets balanced, and that's the place where Tao is. Tao is in between things. Tao's always in between things. It's never this or that. So when both of them come together, and that's the place of Tao, that's where Tao Te Ching originated from.
So, one thing that I was thinking about as you were talking is being a parent and watching my children go through traditional schooling. And it kind of makes me think about all of the structures in our society in general. And they're so kind of the antithesis of the Tao in so many ways. How do you approach parenting? And especially, I don't know if your daughter goes to public school, but it's so goal oriented. And my daughter, at least, gets so fixated on grades and achievement. How do you integrate these ideas into your parenting?
Parenting has been one of my venues for practicing spirituality, because it doesn't matter how you show up to the outside world. Of course, you need to be in a certain way, but what's more important is how you show up at home with your family, with your spouse, with your child. It is so important that she sees me as an example, and I should practice what I preach. And that is something I follow in parenting. So if I want her to be a certain way, I would first be that way. Uh, Say if I want her to be disciplined, want her to have a schedule, I need to have a schedule to start with. And I don't believe in schedules. That makes me the worst parent, that in a conventional setup, and especially with the goals that the kids have these days. And it feels very overwhelming for anyone. There is a practice that we can follow that shift you from into another state within, or even less than a minute. But, but what I really think that the parenting part that Dao Te Ching talks about is how we should stay detached. Like we talked about detachment a little while ago, and definitely try to stay detached from the results. And the kids should give their best without holding on to that attachment on their grades. So it is kind of falls in a very gray line, because we as a parent, we fear judgment, right? Judgment is something that really gets in our way from being the best parent, because we don't widen our perceptive when it comes to aligning with the Tao while parenting. And another way to do this is when you try to embrace the paradox, because paradox is the doorway to the Tao, and Tao Te Ching is entirely built on paradox. And when you embrace the paradox, that I can be in both the states at the same time. I can be grateful and exhausted. I can be fulfilled and I'm longing for something deeper. So you stay at that place where you let both the possibilities stay together in alignment. So in a way, this teaches the kids to embrace the paradox as well, because embracing paradox is not just limited to a certain age group. It is for every age group, and a child could learn paradox at a very young age, so they can embrace both sides and be not affected by whatever happens outside in the outside world, and have the confidence, that faith, and that surrender that yes, the Mother Tao is going to care for us. And that is a place of clarity that we should instill in ourselves first before we preach that to our kids. And that's something that I keep telling my daughter often, because she is part of most of my studies that I do with Tao Te Ching, and I do explain it to her, and it would make her understand, and she's definitely grown. Luckily, she comes from a place where she doesn't get pressured by the outside world, and that has helped me a lot with my parenting in a way that surrender and trust plays such a huge role.
So, in your book, you break it down into 81 micro lessons that are
Mhm.
small and actionable. Why did you approach it in that way? And then, thinking back to the example of your daughter, what is one small micro lesson that you would impart upon a young person, a child who's struggling with attachment to something like grades?
So when people ask why Embracing Paradox is written in 81 micro lessons, I always come back to the verse 47 of the Tao Te Ching, because it reveals how wisdom actually works. Verse 47 says, "You can understand the world without stepping outside your door. You can grasp the Tao without looking out the window. The Tao is pointing us inward." In a world that constantly pushes us to like consume more information, more perspectives, more noise, this verse says something radical, right? The more you chase understanding externally through accumulation, they arrive through presence, like stillness and inner clarity. And that's why the lessons are small. Each micro lesson is not like meant to inform, it's meant to kind of reveal. It creates space instead of like filling it. It invites you to like stop seeking and start listening. And you read one passage, you pause and you let it settle, and then you stop. That stopping is the practice. And the verse 47 warns you, the more you explore, the less you understand. So each lesson knows when to end. It kind of refuses to like overwhelm you. Trust your inner knowing. And 81 micro lessons mirror the rhythms of the Tao itself: subtle, cyclical, inward moving, and real understanding doesn't rush, right? It returns. It folds quietly without force. And embracing paradox isn't meant to be consumed or mastered. It's meant to be visited, turned to, sat with, because the Tao doesn't shout its wisdom. It waits for us to become still enough to hear it. And that, more than anything, is why the book is written that way. So I think the idea is that it should resonate with the readers, and they shouldn't be holding on to the values, the actual, the poetic verses behind each of the Tao Te Ching verses are so pure, and it's got to be felt. The micro lessons kind of leave them the way to feel the lessons rather than be imposed by it.
What's one small, concrete micro lesson that you give to your daughter on a regular basis?
What I tell her is not to hold on to the outcome, rather than being obsessed with what could be. Just be with what is. And I want to be the example that I want her to watch and grow up with. So the paradox that she is seeing is that tension, that the Tao, like just even translating it, writing about it, and even like sharing it publicly, while knowing that Lao Tzu himself warned that Tao can never truly be spoken. And there's a quite tension in that, right? The pull between the reverence and the expression, and that humility and visibility, between honoring something sacred and offering it to the world. And if I have to talk about a certain verse, I would definitely bring up the verse 49. And it says that the sage has no fixed mind. To the good, he is good. To the unkind, he is also good. The teaching is simple, right? Stay sincere, stay flexible. Don't cling on to rigid ideals, not even the spiritual ones. Tao doesn't like ask us to disappear. It asks us to remain true. And that softened everything for me. And the question isn't whether I should speak or stay silent. It's how I speak, right? From where? With what intention? I'm not here to own the Tao, or I'm here to like serve it in the life I'm living with the responsibilities that I have. pretending that I don't exist in the world of work, family. That would not be spiritual. It would be dishonest. So the paradox that I talk to my daughter about is that I tell her that I allow my expression to be visible without turning the wisdom into some kind of an identity or performance. So anything that she does, she has to do it with an intention, and that intention has to be come from that place of knowing from deep inside her heart, and also having that trust where she could share without possessing, like give without like holding, and offer without controlling how it is received. And that's where verse 49 says the sage is sincere with the sincere, and sincere with the insincere as well, because sincerity itself is a virtue. And that teaching has really become my anchor in parenting, right? My parenting doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be sincere. And then that and there's the most tender line. The sage cares for all as the mother cares for her children. And he talks about that, and mother doesn't apologize, right, for having limits. She doesn't collapse to prove her love. She nurtures without depletion. And that's how I'm learning to parent, not by resolving this paradox, but just staying honest in my relationship with it. And I trust that the Tao can move through the modern forms without losing itself. And I trust that sincerity is felt even through the words. And I trust that expression, when rooted in care rather than ego, is not a bit, it's a form of service. So yes, I that's the one paradox that I talk to my daughter about, and I hope she gets it one day. It's like layers and layers of learning and peeling, so I hope she'll get to there. She'll get there at some point.
One thing that keeps popping to mind is how love relates to paradox. Because when I think about love, it is so expansive. And when you think about the opposite of love, it's hate. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not the true paradox there. Because I feel like the more that I lean into love and turn away from what the opposite of love is, it's just so expansive and full of ease. And so, am I wrong in that love and hate are the paradox? What is the
When you kind of
paradox
in it,
of love?
absolutely. So love is, again, it's a label, right? What do you call love? What does love mean to you?
Love is the expansive feeling that I have. I guess words. Well, so this is part of it, that and part of the lesson of the Tao Te Ching, that words are so limiting, and maybe that's
Yes,
why. Yeah,
absolutely.
feelings are so hard to put into words, and so therefore,
Yes.
if it's difficult to put one feeling into words, then it's difficult to put the paradox into words as well.
Exactly. And that's the biggest paradox in itself, is we can't try to define it. It's like you said, it comes from the bottom of your heart. The love is something that just flows from you, from a place of just pure surrender and trust. When you love someone, it could be in so many things. How do you define love? It's one of the greatest paradoxes ever, right, to solve. It's the kind of love that Lao Tzu talks in Tao Te Ching, is the love towards everyone and everything, because we all are part of the same Tao, the same source. Just like how a human body have the feminine and masculine side, everything around the universe itself has the feminine and masculine, and they have to find a way to come together and balance. And that is what the love does. And love, the ability to love, is spreading that pure energy around, and that energy is directly sourced from the Tao. It's not emanating from you individually per se. It's all part of that great source Tao. And that's why Lao Tzu, he doesn't talk about, I'm not sure, 2,500 years ago, I'm sure there were marriages and there were cultures even before believed in all of that. But when we talk about that kind of love, it's again, it's labeling, and that's what Tao doesn't agree with. And it gets very tricky to start categorizing our love into different types of love. And that's where the paradox begins, right? To stay in between that space where you understand your capacity to love someone, and then you know where you stand with that person. There's no lying, there's no wall. The wall's thin when there's love between the two people.
Mhm.
And that definitely is the paradox um in Tao.
I work a lot with people who are in transition, whether it be a career transition, relationship transition, then the major transitions of life and birth that we all experience. How is paradox and the teachings of the Tao Te Ching, how are they helpful in moments of transition?
Paradox is the doorway into the Tao, right? The Tao Te Ching is built entirely on paradox, softness and strength, action, non-action, fullness and emptiness, being and non-being, not because Lao Tzu wanted to be poetic, but because life itself moves through these opposites. Truth doesn't live at the extremes. It lives in the meeting point between them. And here's that beautiful irony, right? The more chaotic, overstimulated, and outcome driven our world becomes, the more essential like these ancient paradoxes become. We live in a time obsessed with certainty, speed, optimization, and control. And that is a pressure to have answers, to fix ourselves, to upgrade constantly. But the Tao offers a direct challenge to this mindset. The more you force life, the more rigid you become. The more you soften, the more life aligns. And paradox is the remedy to the world that insists everything must be solved, named, perfected. Instead of like collapsing into one side, paradox invites us to allow truths, two truths at once. Like I can be grateful and exhausted. I can be fulfilled and longing for something deeper, and I can be strong and tender. I can be clear and open to not knowing. And this shift from resolution to allowance is what the Tao teaches over and over again. When Lao Tzu speaks of emptiness creating usefulness, of softness overcoming hardness, of the sage acting without claiming credit, he's showing us that wisdom arises from holding opposites without forcing them into one fixed interpretation. So paradoxes is how the Tao restores the balance. It
Mhm.
softens the nervous system. It widens our perception. It dissolves the need for control. It turns struggle into some form of spaciousness. And when that spaciousness appears, something profound happens. Life just becomes workable again. Like not because these contradictions have vanished, right? But because we are no longer fighting them. And that is why embracing paradox exists. Like it's not to offer more concepts to master, right? But to point toward a way of being that mirrors the Tao's own nature of being open, fluid, empty, receptive, unfixed, quietly powerful. And paradox is not a problem to solve, it's the path home. The path that has always pointed to, like, in the world that pushes us towards singular answers, paradox reminds us that wholeness is found only when we allow life to include everything, include both the positive and the negatives in life together. And that is why paradox is so essential, especially during the crisis, because it lets you comfortably be in that middle space and hold you down there until that solution arises within you, not by forcing, but just from within you, from that space of the intuition, from that space of Tao.
That really resonates with me. I work with so many people and talk with so many people, and experienced this in my own life where many women, especially, have gone through really difficult traumas in recent time and are now awakening to another way of being. And what I hear over and over and over again is I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm listening to my intuition, but I don't know what's next. And I don't know exactly what steps I'm supposed to take. Listening to you is making me think, well, maybe that's the point, actually. Maybe we are just supposed to be on that opposite side of the going and the doing and the striving and just be and of trust that the actions we're supposed to take will just arise naturally. Have you found that in your own life that when you ease and when you release, your next steps become very clear?
Absolutely. I do practice that in my real life, and I have talked about that a lot in my book as well on how just releasing that outcome really helps you get to where you want to. And one of the chapters that I've talked about is how I've lived across three different countries and how that shaped the person who I am. So I grew up in India. I was born in India. I grew up there, and growing up in India, even like getting access to pure water is was so difficult. The times that I used to live in India, and we used to stand waiting for the water truck to arrive to catch the water, and we catch the water and take it all the way home, and that happens every single day. And we were constantly worried about what kind of disease that is going to bring to us. So we used to boil the water multiple times before drinking it. And when I moved to the United States, I was like, when you open the tap and you get fresh water, and it felt absolutely amazing. I was so excited to have clear, clean water just coming out of my tap. And then I got married, and my husband was Australian, and I moved to Australia. And there, I saw how beautiful their healthcare system worked. They worked so much in harmony. People supported, and when I first went to the hospital in Australia, I went into an emergency and I came back, no questions asked, no insurance cards, no dollar, nothing. I didn't have to pay a penny. It was so seamless just getting out of the hospital. And then I started comparing in my head, because when I moved to another country, I always feel like that country is better than the one that I came from. So I would constantly compare to which is okay. I have three options now. I could go back to India, I could go to Australia, I could go to the United States. I'm constantly analyzing them and trying to see which is the best country for me. And at this point, I've left it. I've just let the right answer just raise from me, from that space of intuition, and I'm just living where Tao takes me, and I'm just going with the flow. I don't try to control on where I want to move, what my next step's gonna be. I'm just living it. I'm just letting it all just pass and 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 just embracing it. So my relationship with the emotion has definitely softened. Instead of dramatizing them or suppressing them, I began doing something much simpler and speaking the truth in just honest words. I am
Mm,
sad, I'm here. I'm happy. I'm afraid, I'm tired. No story, no justification, no performance, just the truth. Just expressed gently. And here's the paradox, right? When emotions are like just allowed to exist without exaggeration and without suppression, they lose their power to control us. They move, they teach, they pass, they leave, they kind of leave the clarity behind. Paradox has really helped me to let go of the needing my feelings need to be validated or understood by others.
mm,
And when emotional expressions align with your inner truth instead of an external approval, like something stabilizing just happens inside. And the Tao teaches that anything forced just cannot endure, right? So why should we force our emotions to be anything other than what they are? Like
mm,
now when something intense happens in me that I have to make a decision together, like I don't try to like hold it all together perfectly. I don't collapse into it either, and I just let it move through me. just naturally, like wind, like rain, like every cycle then the Tao describes, right? The balance allows emotions to complete their cycle. And this to me is emotional freedom, not the absence of these strong feelings and making me to decide, but it's the ability to meet them without force, to let them come, to let them go, and to trust that nothing we feel is really meant to last forever.
Find that in order for me to fully trust, I really have to let go of fear to a great extent and really only utilize fear as the thing that needs me to move immediately. Any kind of fear of something that isn't related to movement in the here and now, I try to release because it's not informative. What role does fear play in your life?
Fear again, when our when we have the capacity to hold both the truths together, and when you have that trust, when you have that surrender to Tao, it is it is very natural for the fear to like just disappear and go. But the challenge is to get to that place of being in alignment with Tao and to let the grip of the fear move away is very essential for us to start implementing or embracing the paradoxes, just soften it. Like we don't have to get to a point A to point B in one step, in one big leap. We can make it happen with one small step, 1% of softening within us. That has really helped me to release the fear, because this fear of public speaking and the fear of being visible was is the biggest fear that I have. And I'm a very private person. You could literally find nothing about me out on the internet because I'm so private. I don't even have an Instagram account, or um, um I don't want to express myself out there, but this ability for me to come out and be open in a podcast episode, this was a big leap of step that I had to take. And yes, there were fear, and I did address them in ways where I don't control how anybody that's listening to me would react to me speaking. I would let that fear go, because when I have that expectation that the people that are listening to me are going to like me, at that point I'm just giving up that attachment to the outcome. And loosening attachment just doesn't make us passive, right? It makes us resilient. It makes us fight back and come back again with a better clarity and with recalibrated mindset. And that has really helped me. Paradox has helped me really loosen this fear of being visible and opening up about myself and my life in an open forum like this.
Well, I'm so glad that you are opening up because you have such a beautiful story and you can tell how embodied the Tao Te Ching is inside of you. And I think talking to you, I definitely can feel it. And it's a transmission that's not just through words, it really is feeling. So I'm just so grateful. If there's one takeaway somebody can have in reading your book, what would be the most important thing that you would want people to learn?
If readers take just one thing from embracing paradox, and I hope it's this: life does not ask us to choose between the opposites. It asks us to hold them. We are taught very early, right, to split our experience into sides. Is it a failure? Is it a success? Was it a strength or softness, certainty or doubt, light or dark? And so much of our suffering just comes from believing that we must stand firmly on one side in order to be whole. But the Tao teaches something far more compassionate and far more true. It teaches us that wisdom doesn't live at the extremes, it lives in the space between. You can be strong and tender. You can be evolving and still enough. You can feel lost and deeply guided at the same time. You can act with intention and release the outcome. When we stop forcing ourselves to collapse into one identity, one answer, one narrative, something loosens inside us. The body softens, the mind quiets, and the deep intelligence has room to surface. That pause, the pause where both truths are allowed, is where clarity begins to rise on its own. Not the sharp clarity of certainty, but the steady clarity of alignment. That pause is where the compassion expands, where judgment dissolves, where effort can turn into ease. And that pause is where the Tao lives. So my hope is not that readers walk away with answers, but with permission, permission to be human without fragmenting themselves, permission to hold their contradictions without shame, permission to trust that they don't have to resolve everything in order to belong. Because when we make room for paradox, we make room for wholeness. And wholeness, I've learned, is already here, waiting patiently in the space. We stop trying to take control. When we take control, we mess things up so badly. So the best thing to do is to let go and let God, let Tao in to guide you.
As you were talking, I was thinking about how there's such a parallel between the internal. If we embrace paradox internally, I really believe that it will change the world as a whole. The more that we embrace the paradox and the teachings of the Tao Te Ching, which I think are very similar to so many different teachings, that we would see less division in the world. Do you have a greater hope like that?
Absolutely. I grew up learning about the yogas, the three yogas, karma yoga, jnana yoga, and bhakti yoga, which is nothing but my guru. I witnessed in my guru all these characters in traditional yoga philosophy, right? The three classical paths to spiritual realization. The karma yoga is basically the path of selfless action, and jnana yoga is the path of wisdom and inquiry, and bhakti yoga is the path of devotion and love. And each one emphasizes a different way of relating to life. Karma yoga uses your hands, jnana yoga uses your mind, and bhakti yoga uses your heart. And yet, the deeper you go, the more you realize that these paths are really not separate. They are just the different facets of the same jewel. And what surprised me much later in life is how beautifully this aligns with Taoist wisdom, right? The Tao describes life as a flow, a natural moment of intelligence that just runs through all things. But when we align with that moment, we find harmony. When we resist, we kind of suffer. And each of these three yogic paths is really a practice in softening that resistance. And karma yoga, what they say is you do action without the attachment. And that's basically what Wu Wei talks about. In karma yoga, the teaching is so simple: act sincerely, but release the outcome. You give your best and you do not cling. You sow, but you don't take credit. You move, but you don't force. And these parallels the Taoist principle of Wu Wei, the effortless action, action that arises from alignment, not ego or tension, action that just feels natural, like the river flowing around rocks instead of through them. And karma yoga trains the body to participate in life without gripping, without striving, or without identifying. And it teaches you that service is sacred. And when you release attachment, the work becomes joy. Those parallels really make a huge impact when especially when I grew up with these multiple cultures and I knew what was going on in their world. And there was a sweet spot where all these different cultures, Sarah, meet and talk and exchange ideas. And that is the spot that I was unintentionally put in to understand. So it was very, very enlightening for me to see that all these different cultures speak about the same thing and their inner message was the same. And it was just wrapped up in different clothes, for lack of better words. So I was blessed to witness my guru who embodied all these three paths effortlessly. He worked tirelessly. He built hospitals, schools, and all that. And he was in Jnana Yoga, his clarity was piercing. He had this way of like dissolving illusion with just one sentence, right? And in Bhakti Yoga, he was just pure love, expansive, unconditional, and transformative. just watching him just taught me something so profound that you don't choose a path, you kind of become the integration of all the three paths. And that integration happens naturally when you deepen your sincerity, your clarity, and your love.
So, what are your hopes for the time that we're entering into? Because the way that I see it, at least, we're seeing so much division. And at the same time, so many people are awakening to a different kind of world and desiring a different kind of world that is definitely more in line with what the Tao Te Ching teaches. How do you see the coming years? And do you see us collectively moving in a certain direction?
We are already, and I feel like this is the best time, Sarah, to be alive and to witness this moment. If I could pick any time that I want to be alive, since I've known maybe 2000 years time frame, but this would be the best time because we are in the cusp of so many developments in multiple technologies, right, that are aiding us to where we want to be, especially in the technology and in the AI side, and the way that all of that is just mind boggling. And sometimes it's really important to see that different perspective, right? When I think about the future of Taoism, at least in the next decade, especially with like the digital media, with the global connectivity, and now AI just shaping so much of our experience, what strikes me is how naturally, just naturally, for Taoist tradition could adapt to this, because Taoism has always been about the flow, about meeting the moment as it is. And we are entering a time where that skill is becoming very essential. And I think Taoism will grow in three very interesting ways, right? First, accessibility. For most of the history, the Tao Te Ching lived in scrolls and monasteries and lineages. Now, anyone with a phone can access translations, teachings, and discussions instantly. Global connectivity means the Tao is no longer tied to a geography or culture. It's becoming a universal language for people seeking softness in a hard world. And presence is in this such an overstimulated world, right? And second, the blending of wisdom and technology. AI can't replace spiritual experience, but it can amplify access. We will see Taoist meditations, Tao inspired decision making tools, and digital platforms that help people slow down instead of speed up. What's beautiful is that the Tao does not resist technology. It simply asks, is this aligned with the harmony, or is it creating more noise?
Mm.
And I think we will see a rise of technologies that help people regulate, breathe, reflect, and connect with simplicity again. And third, a shift from philosophy to embodiment, right? In a world of constant information, people are craving lived wisdom, not lectures. The Tao's emphasis on Wu Wei, softness, non force, humility, compassion, these are qualities the modern world desperately needs. I see Taoism becoming less of an ancient text people read and more of a practice people live, like in leadership and parenting, in relationships, in digital age, and how we respond to the pace of change. Here's a paradox, right? The faster our world becomes, the more relevant the Tao will be. The louder the collective noise gets, the more people will seek the quiet teachings of the Tao. The more AI shapes our outside world, the more we'll return to inner wisdom. So I don't see like Taoism being outdated. I actually see blossoming, like not through the force, not through evangelizing, but through resonance. People will find the way to the Tao because their hearts are tired of striving, and the Tao offers an ancient, timeless alternative, a way of being that is so natural, gentle, grounded, and just deeply human. And that to me is the future of Taoism, not competing with technology, but just guiding us in how to stay awake, authentic, and connected when everything around us is just moving and in constant influx. And it just creates that fertile ground for us to be grounded and to stay put. So
Prashanthi, I just got chills with what you were saying, and I can almost feel the presence of Lao Tzu in a way, in that I feel like he he may have had a knowing that the Tao Te Ching wasn't going to be something that was going to be embraced right away, and that wasn't the intention either, right? Almost as if he had a knowing that time, I like to say time is an illusion in a way, in that it would come back around. It would be appropriate in the exact moment that is needed the most.
Absolutely. The Tao Te Ching may be like over 2,500 years old, but when you read through it through the lens of today's political and social climate, Sarah, it feels almost startlingly relevant. But Lao Tzu, he saw them is exactly what we are living through now. And that wisdom he offered speaks directly to the tension, the division, the intensity that we are experiencing as a society. One of the core teachings of Tao is that when we lose our connection to the way, to the Tao, we begin to overcorrect. We start creating more rules, more moral declarations, more virtue signaling, not because society is becoming more virtuous, but because we feel the absence of natural harmony. And this is where Lao Tzu says that in one of the verses, when the Tao is forgotten, moral righteousness appears. When wisdom is performed, pretense follows. When harmony dissolves, loyalty and duty must be enforced. Tell me that isn't what we're seeing today, Sarah,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
We're living in a world where morality is loudly declared but rarely embodied, where intelligence is celebrated but wisdom is often missing, right? When that social unity is preached, but true connection kind of feels fragmented everywhere. The Tao helps us understand why. When natural balance is lost, artificial balance is loudly demanded. And what the Tao Te Ching offers is not a political stance, right? But a way of seeing. It reminds us that the real change never comes from force, aggression, or moral superiority. It comes from alignment, from leaders and individuals who are grounded, humble, and connected to something deeper than their own opinions. Lao Tzu warns against rulers who control too much, speak too much, interfere too much. He teaches that best leaders are the ones who create the conditions for people to thrive on their own. Leaders who are almost invisible because they empower rather than impose. Imagine what kind of leadership would that look like today, right? The Tao offers something powerful for all of us, not just leaders. It reminds us to soften, to listen, to question our certainty, to recognize our shared humanity instead of clinging to our divisions, to remember that the more we push, the more resistance we create. The Tao doesn't give us political answers, it gives us inner posture. And from that posture, better answers arise naturally. So, how does Tao speak to in our current climate? It reminds us that the chaos we see is not new and it's not permanent. It shows us the louder the world becomes, the more important it is for it to return to quiet. It calls us back to humility, the presence, and the wisdom of moving with life rather than against it. In many ways, the Tao Te Ching isn't commenting on politics, it's just offering a path back to sanity for all of us. Because what we're living in is absolute insanity. But I know that when there is yin, there is going to be yang. I know I have that trust in now that the better times are coming or just on the horizon. We just can't see it, but it is there and it has to, right? That's how everything balances itself out. And with that trust and with that surrender, I guess that would definitely help us to get through the everyday life.
Mhm.
And really, one of the biggest arguments that I hear about Tao is that people think that it's too ambiguous or too esoteric to be useful.
Mm.
And I actually understand where they're coming from because the Tao doesn't give you instructions and it gives you invitations. And for the culture that craves certainty, formulas, and step-by-step answers. Like we ask people, how do you get enlightened? Give me a step-by-step answer to get enlightened. It doesn't work that way. And that can feel frustrating, right? But here's the paradox. The Tao's ambiguity is actually not a flaw. It's a source of its usefulness. Life isn't always clear cut, right? Emotions aren't always linear, and leadership isn't predictable. Relationships are never straightforward, and the mind is like rarely satisfied with simple answers. So Lao Tzu didn't give us clarity in the form of rigid definitions. He gave us clarity in the form of spaciousness. The ambiguity of the Tao creates room for your own wisdom to rise. It doesn't tell you what to think, it helps you see. And honestly, that's what makes the text timeless. A literal prescriptive book would have become outdated long time ago. But the Tao Te Ching continues to speak to people across cultures, identities, and eras because it reflects each reader back to themselves. To me, the people who find it too ambiguous are often approaching it like a textbook, expecting it to be straightforward. But the Tao isn't offering information, it's offering transformation. It asks you, can you hold the two truths at once? Can you find clarity through softness? Can you trust timing instead of forcing outcomes? Can you see beyond language and into experience? And so when critics say it's too vague or too practical, I gently offer this perspective, right? The Tao becomes practical the moment you stop trying to decode it and start allowing it. When you read it slowly, when you feel into it, when you let its paradox sit in your body rather than your mind, suddenly it's the most helpful text in the world. It becomes a mirror, a companion, a way of moving through life with less resistance and more grace. Yeah, Tao is ambiguous. Yes, absolutely. It's ambiguous. And then thank goodness it is, because that ambiguity is what allows it to meet each of us exactly where we are. And that's a beautiful part of Tao Te Ching and the paradoxes.
Prashanthi, I agree with you that I wouldn't want to live in any other time, and to be in this world right now, as challenging as it is, to be able to witness this rebalancing, both internally with individuals and collectively, is just such an amazing gift. And I'm so grateful to you for writing this book and for having this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor for me to be here and to just be my authentic self. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for creating this platform, Sarah, for people, very ordinary people like me to come here and to get our voices heard. It means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Goddess in Training. I hope something in this episode stirred your knowing or softened your heart. If it spoke to you, share it with someone who needs it, or leave a review or comment to help others find us. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to hear more conversations like this, please consider supporting Goddess in Training on Patreon. For more tools and offerings to deepen your intuition practice, visit goddessintraining.online. You can also join the Scroll of Sashat on Substack for twice-weekly stories of how I followed my intuition. The music for Goddess in Training is Madre Ayahuasca by Arkawa, and you can find more of his music in the link to his website in the show notes. Remember, your intuition is not a mystery, it's a memory. Keep listening.
Resplandor del fuego, estrellita, tabaco santo, fuerza de rapé, soplo de luz, soplo encantado, viajecito